The Force Carbon Pro is an unapologetic replica of GT's EWS Enduro race bike. After decades of experimentation, GT came full circle back to horse-length suspension, fed it 150 millimeters of travel with some superb Fox components, and unleashed it on the circuit in search of podium glory. We unleashed it on the high-consequence rocks and chunder of southwest Utah to see how it does in the real world. We kind of realized that a nice 4-bar or horse-length frame can do just fine.
Which is sort of where they started, like way back when, with like the LTS-1.
Mm-hmm. Well, the RTS came before that.
Right, but we won't count the RTS. They went to the horse link with the LTS, which was a great bike, before they went down the iDrive wormhole. Mm-hmm. And so here we got the GT Force. This is it's a beefy frame. It's designed in their mind, like this is their enduro-focused bike. When you do get the suspension where you want it to be, it seems to me, at least, I thought that it went downhill very well. It was stable, it was planted.
It's super composed.
Yeah, you couldn't shake it off its line very much.
I think we all noticed that we had to run more sag than we would have guessed. What do you think you were hitting? Maybe 35% when it started to feel most at home?
Yeah, I ended up going beyond that just to try it, but I was the most comfortable at around 35%. And it worked. The issue that I had with it is that it made climbing a little bit wonky on it. For one thing, it was the effect it had on the geometry. I mean, it's already pretty friendly geometry. It's 76-degree seat angle in the high position, which we rode it in.
Which is not even that high of a position. Climbing this bike, you still really had to watch for pedal strikes, even in high mode.
True.
So what I found was, it seems like there's an optimal position that any rear suspension wants to be in when you're climbing. And being in that deep sag, it was a little suboptimal.
Sometimes it's a trade-off and you have to find what does kind of the less perfect of both, but you can deal with. And now we're starting to see other bikes where they still feel, like they have plenty of traction, but you stand up to pedal, and I'm thinking of maybe the Evil offering here. And you have that traction, but you're not wallowing in the suspension. You can really hammer away standing up. So for something like this, it was a little different. We were more finding a compromise.
There are a lot of other bikes that are that, and they're a fair bit more sprightly going uphill.
But I'd say a lot of those are 29ers.
That's true.
But you would think that with the bigger wheels that maybe they wouldn't be more sprightly going uphill. They would roll over things better. But you'd think that I would think the smaller wheels would land a little more snap to this bike. But I did find myself struggling a little bit with weight and just what you described, where you're catching pedal strikes, and every once in a while, it felt a little bit like the rear wheel would just sort of hang up on some things. Could have been wheel size, could have been kinematics. I couldn't really tell.
We are riding a place where there's a lot of ledgy stuff, things that naturally are going to hang up just about any bike.
Yes.
So
We all found the bottom line is that that's an afterthought in this bike. It really is meant to be an unshakable, bruisery kind of a downhill bike. And that's reflected in its geometry. And the slack 65.5 degree head angle, relatively long chain stays for a 27.5 bike, 435 in the back end. And then again, that low bottom bracket. And when we set that deep sag, it slackened it out that much further. So it really was very businesslike when you were rocking down the kind of downhills we were facing today.
Yeah, and I felt like it held a line beautifully. It was, again, some of the bikes we were riding with bigger wheels in that really rough chundry stuff. I thought that it was as composed as those. And I liked the way it carved turns. Like, it cornered well. At the same time, the bar is really high this year in terms of the quality of the competition that's out there.
When it comes to component spec, GT has chosen wisely where to deliver quality. The Fox factory float suspension is usually found on much more expensive bikes. Other quality touches throughout the spec further enhance the value of the Force Carbon Pro.
one thing that this does a great job at is your value. For a bike shop branded bike, $5,250 is not a bad deal for what you get.
And they put the money into things like the suspension. You get factory 36 front, factory DPX2 in the rear. I mean, they put a carbon Lev CI seat post on it, and it needed it. This was not a light bike. It was 32.7 pounds, one of the heaviest bikes in the test. There's one place I wish that they had put the money into on this is the brakes. I mean, you have all this potential for speed and all of these rowdy parts and rowdy geometry, and they put a set of SRAM guide Rs on there. I mean, a few years ago, this is the basic SRAM guide. They were a pretty good trail brake. Now the code is out there, there's 4-piston XTs, there's all these options for brakes that could rise to the level of this bike, and the guide Rs really held us back, I think.
And it wasn't necessarily for the sake of saving weight, because it's
Or
not
even
that light.
necessarily saving money. I mean, they went with Kashima coated suspension front and rear.
Yeah.
Could have saved that. So, choices.
But there's something delightfully old school and purpose-driven about this bike, is that it's not aiming at versatility. It doesn't compromise that unflappable, descending, bruisery feel in the effort to be an all-rounder.
Every year we have one of these that I'll be the old guy of the group here. I just feel like every year there's a bike, sometimes two, that I'm just not man enough to muscle. And this year, this is the one for me, where I just don't feel like I'm burly enough or aggressive enough to really be able to take this bike where it needs to be.
It's really meant for somebody who is going to be at that red line the whole way down. And I think it responds really well the times that I was able to get the needle close to it.
Yeah, I couldn't get the needle to budge. It just sort of was there, flat at the bottom.
One bike that this made me think of was the Da Vinci Troy. I mean, we rode the last iteration of it back in Vermont, and it was one of these bikes that really only worked when you were hitting it hard.
And I had the same feelings about that bike as well. Like, I'm just not, you guys loved it. And I was like, this bike is just too meaty for me.
And this is a notch or two meatier than the Troy.
It'll take a strong rider to get the most out of the Force Carbon Pro, and that rider will be rewarded most when the terrain gets steep and the vegetation begins to blur. For qualified pilots seeking a high-value package to race enduro, this is a solid bike worthy of consideration. Consider the full review and the rest of this year's bikes at bikemag.com.